All right. All right, guys, we're ready to show on the road. And a sign-in sheet, if you don't mind, give us your name and phone number and email. You can pass that around. I'm pulling a fast one on you tonight. We're doing another lecture tonight. 2 weeks in a row because you guys all came here tonight. You were expecting the kumbaya, warm and fuzzy, circled up, let's talk about things group. No. We're not doing it. We're getting down to business. I won't be here next Monday, so I wanted to do back-to-back. That's why I'm doing this. I will be out of town next week, so I'll do another lecture tonight. Sorry about that confusion, but that's okay. It'll be all good. At the end of the day, you'll get what you need. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at FAVOR Greenville. Been here for about 5 years. This is sort of who I am professionally. And you know, I'm a counselor, certified addiction counselor, licensed clinical addiction specialist. I'm an interventionist. It's interesting, there are 3 different types of certified interventionists around the nation. One is called the Johnson model, the other one is called Kraft, and then I'm a certified Arise interventionist. We don't do a lot of interventions at FAVOR Greenville the way we used to whenever I first started here. When I first started here, it was literally, actually my phone number was on the front of the door until about a year ago. My personal cell phone number was on front of the door until about a year ago. And then I was like, that I might want to get that off of there. Given the fact that there are 20,000 people enrolled in FAVOR Greenville, it might be a good idea to get that off of there. And I did a lot, we used to be able to do a lot more interventions than we do now. We do family meetings, and you might say to yourself, you know, what's the difference between an intervention and a family meeting? You know, an intervention is a bit more intentional. It requires some preparation time up front. How many people, by a show of hands, have seen the TV show Intervention, or better yet, participated in Intervention? You guys know what I'm talking about? The one where they kind of tell you that you're going by Grandma's house. Hey, we're going to go over to Grandma's house. It's her birthday. And you're like, well, but her birthday's not till December, and it's like July, but you're kind of all strung out, and you're sort of like high anyway, so you're kind of like, well, whatever, it's Grandma's birthday. Maybe there's some Lortab in her medicine cabinet. You guys don't get this. If I said this to the other group, they would completely understand what I was talking about. So you go over to Grandma's house for the birthday cake, and you walk in, and your whole family's sitting in a circle, and there's a stranger there. That intervention, right? That requires some work. It requires some preparation. Usually have to write some letters. Anyone have to do that? Kind of write a letter. So we don't have the capability to quite go that far. And what we know, though, from the statistics and from the research around that, you don't have to go that far. Only about 5% of the time do you have to go that far. What we're able to do, and what we encourage families to do, is kind of do your own interventions. If you want me to be perfectly honest with you, we believe that you can learn how to have these conversations and set these boundaries. And then certainly if you have a FAVOR staff in the room a couple times, really, what is an intervention? An intervention is this formal opportunity to tell your loved one, we're not doing it the way we've been doing it. And here's what's going to happen from this point moving forward. So we hope that through coming to these family groups, coming to these type of meetings, talking to folks on the phone, talking to coaches on the phone, that you can start to learn the skills to be able to kind of run your own interventions. And the reason for that is, guys, we don't want you to have to rely on a professional for the rest of your loved one's recovery. And the reason is what? It's going to go up and down and up and down, and we know for sure that this is a chronic disease, and we know that it's characterized by slips and falls, and very few people just go to rehab and live happily ever after. I mean, very few people. Actually, I don't know that I personally know anybody that's the story, where they didn't have a setback along the way. So what we would like to have come out of these groups, and even some of our coaching sessions when you talk to people, is you develop the knowledge and you develop the confidence. You sort of become your own expert. Does that make sense? You become your own expert, that kind of thing. I believe this is the first time there's ever been a dog in family group. It's all right. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. All right. So that's who I am professionally, and a little bit more about my background. I've spent about 18 years working in drug and alcohol and in behavioral health, if you know the term behavioral health, mental health, and substance use disorder. For the first 12 years, I guess it was 12 or 13 years, I did a lot of work in places like community mental health, inpatient drug and alcohol rehab, did a lot of outpatient drug and alcohol rehab work, ran a private practice. As I said, I was an interventionist. 5 years ago, I came to FAVOR Greenville. The difference of FAVOR Greenville is we are a recovery coaching model, if you're new to this. So it's not a clinical level. We're not going to try to figure out your relationship with your mom when you were 3 years old or anything like that. The house is on fire, and we're going to give you advice on how to put the fire out. Then maybe we'll refer you to somebody to help you with the foundation. So tonight's group is meant to be an educational lecture, that kind of thing. It's not meant to be therapy, and it's not meant to replace therapy. So if you're seeing a therapist, please continue to see a therapist. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, please continue to see a psychiatrist. All of the above, right? And then I'm also a person in long-term recovery. My story is, the first substance I pick up is alcohol. It's at the age of 14. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what to make of it. Didn't think anything of it. I did not fall in love right away. It was a relatively nondescript experience for me. There used to be this thing that you did back in the day. So I want you guys to think about this. Back in the day, kids used to do this thing. It was called play outside. and when it came to sports, you did this other thing that was called pick-up sports. I don't know if you've noticed today that like everything is organized. Like, what is up with that? Why? Even with my kids playing with their neighbors, why is it like a business partnership? Why do I have to call and make a play date? Whatever happened to just playing? Amen. Gay agrees with me. So, I'm playing pickup baseball. It's afterward. There's alcohol there. It was beer. I drank some. No big deal. Didn't fall in love right away. And you'll talk to some people who describe their experience with substances, and they will say that they fell in love right away. That it was like a puzzle piece that was like, boom. That wasn't my experience. What happened for me, guys, is it happened over time, slowly but surely. There's a word for that. How many people have heard the word progression? That's called progression, where it starts here, and over time it gets worse. And that's how it was for me. And then the final straw was in 1999. I was in a car accident. I was rear-ended at a red light. I wound up being rushed to the emergency room. And I walked out of the emergency room that day. This is in Western Pennsylvania, which is ground zero for the kind of distribution of Oxycontin and that kind of thing. And all the doctors were told, don't let people feel pain. I walk out of the emergency room with 120 Darvocet. And I began this journey and this addiction with opioids. It was really, really, really ugly, like next level stuff. I had a problem with alcohol before that, but like next level stuff. So, and then I've been in recovery for 18 years. All right, so that's sort of who I am. And everybody who works at FAVOR is either somebody in recovery themselves or a family member of somebody in recovery. So we really value the shared experience. We want to have the theory, we want to have the academic background, and we want to understand how this stuff works psychologically, but at the end of the day, we really value somebody who's gone through this, who can say to another mom, like, I know what this is like. This is what I did when I was in your shoes. Or a person in recovery can say, I know what this is like. This is what I did when I was in your shoes. And we start off every group, guys, with a real quick review. And a lot of you have come a bunch of times to this group, and I apologize that it gets redundant, but we also have new people here every week, so we are always going to talk about the basics. What is addiction? What is a substance use disorder? And we won't ever skip that. It's not a moral weakness. I'm not going to go through all of that. So here we go. We'll go right to this slide. This is kind of like depressed brain activity. There's a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine, and it's in this part of the brain right here. It's hard to see. where this is, but it's right here. If you take your finger and you're able to push it into your brain, you can touch your mesolimbic dopamine system. Sound like a National Geographic show now. There's the native's mesolimbic dopamine system. And so that is what is involved where substance use disorder is concerned. And what happens, guys, anytime you do anything pleasurable, dopamine is released. If you're hungry and you eat, dopamine is released. If you're thirsty and you drink, dopamine is released. Even if you're having a conversation with people you love, dopamine is released. It's what makes you feel contentment. It's what makes you feel any type of pleasure. And the reason it's released is, think about it, it makes your brain say, go do that again. So can you see how that's really important, where eating when you're hungry and drinking when you're thirsty and being around people who are safe? Do you guys get the logic of dopamine? Makes all kinds of sense. Amazing. The brain is an amazing creation. The problem where substance use is concerned, don't quote me on these units. I'm just doing this for sake of argument. Let's say for sake of argument, when you're hungry and you eat, you release 5 units of dopamine. But when you take a substance outside your body and put it into your body, it's a pain pill, it's smoking a joint, it's drinking liquor, that kind of thing. What does it do? It adds 10 or 15 units. So you flood your brain with dopamine. Now naturally it felt good. So I always say this, like if using substances, like if the first time I got high, it was like getting tasered, I wouldn't have gone back for more. It was a very pleasurable experience. It just was, man. I'm not promoting it out there in Facebook land. Don't do drugs. Kids, don't do drugs. Okay, and so, boom, floods your brain. Feels really good. You actually don't just get pleasure. What do you get? You get euphoria. And for some of us, we go back for more. And then we go back for more. And we go back for more. And over time, based on a couple factors. The factors are age of first use, hereditary factors, environmental factors, and then of course the substance that you're using. Certain substances are more powerful than others. Over time, the brain overcorrects. Too much dopamine is dangerous. Too much dopamine is dangerous. And what happens is it shuts off the production of dopamine. And then this is what you're left on the left, guys. On your left, this is when you get into that state when you are constantly seeking the substance. This is why your loved one does the things that makes you scratch their head. Scratch your head. Maybe you scratch their head too. Why is she doing that? I can't believe she knew that the DSS worker was coming over and the kids were going to get taken away if she continued to use. He knew he was going to get fired. One of the biggest things today, people cannot understand how in the world would somebody who's addicted to heroin go out and shoot dope when you can die from fentanyl and carfentanil. There's nothing reasonable about it. Do you guys understand that? Some of you have been coming for years and you still look at me puzzled when I tell you this. Because I know what's going on. It's very hard to understand unless you've been in the shoes. Unless you've done that over and over again, it's very hard to understand. And the reason why I tell you this, I say this every week, it's not to make an excuse for your loved one. It's not so that you go home and you let something go and you kind of look the other way. It's not that at all. It's so you completely 100% understand what you're dealing with. And you know you're dealing with somebody who is not coming from a rational place. You're not going to argue them into a change. You're not going to debate them into a change. You probably aren't even going to consequence them into a change. Now, we believe that you can, over time, you can set boundaries and you can do things and you can make profound changes in your own behavior that will influence the person toward change. But that's what it's about. This is something other than just heavy partying. You guys get that? I'm going to talk about heavy partying in a second. A lot of people party hard. 32% of the American population. It's a lot of people party or use at what's considered a risky level. But that doesn't mean that they're addicted. About 16% move into addiction. Do you guys get that? So and sometimes you can't tell the difference. Actually, many times you can't tell the difference. The person themselves has to talk to you about telling the difference. Any questions about the dopamine that I can clarify? Why does it not happen to every single person who uses substances? I don't know. Why doesn't every single person who smokes a cigarette wind up with lung cancer? Why doesn't every single person who pounds a sleeve full of Oreos wind up with You guys know what a sleeve is? I can do a whole sleeve, man. At night, at like 2 o'clock in the morning with like milk, I can do a whole sleeve, dude. You think that's not even impressive? Well, give it a shot, ma'am. Give it a shot. That white stuff inside Oreos allegedly is just as addictive as crack cocaine. I don't know if you read that. Did someone have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Does the brain go back to normal after?
Yes. So the question was, does the brain go back to normal after you're in recovery? Absolutely. And sometimes quicker than others, depending on what the substance is. You start to feel better slowly but surely. A lot of times it depends on what you're doing, like exercise, prayer, meditation, group therapy, that kind of stuff. If you're living right, you tend to get that, the brain comes back online quicker. So it's not a permanent condition, and that's good news. All right, so how do we know? We talk about this. We'll go through it real quick. These are the criteria. This is sort of how you know. Consequences, continue to use despite clear consequences. Tolerance, withdrawal. Everybody knows what that is. More and more to get the same effect. You don't have the substance, you get sick. Craving. Craving is an internal process. You would never know whether your loved one is going through craving. But how many people never have had a craving for anything? Of course you have. You know, multiply that by about 100 times. It's always in your mind. You're always thinking about it. It's just churning. It's like a gerbil on a wheel. Just boom, go get this, go get this, go get this. Inability to cut down. You say you're going to, drinking is the best example of this. You say you're only going to drink on the weekends and you just can't stick to that. It keeps bleeding out into the week. It's more and more. Inability to control. Okay, I'm going to go out tonight. I'm going to have 2 beers after group, which would be really weird for me to do. But if I did that, and that, that's me controlling. But if I go out to have 2 beers and I drink all night, that's an example of inability to control. Physical danger, using despite physical danger. I guess probably one of the best examples of this would be drinking and driving repetitively. You're putting yourself in danger. A great deal of time, it becomes a full-time job. Work or school problems related to this, you can't fulfill your role. Social activities, you only go to the party, and interpersonal problems, people are mad. If you get 6 or more of those criteria, you technically meet the criteria for substance use disorder severe. Addiction does not appear in the diagnostic manual. The word addiction is not used. It's whatever the substance is followed by use disorder severe. Cannabis use disorder severe. Alcohol use disorder severe. Opioid use disorder severe. And so on and so forth. And this is as close as you get to kind of like our version of an x-ray. One of the hardest things about this field is what? Trying to get a person to recognize what's going on. It's very difficult. Yes, ma'am?
The craving, does that ever go away?
Yeah. I haven't had a fixed thought, obsession, or craving for alcohol since I was probably about 30 days. At 30 days of recovery, I knew I would never use drugs again the rest of my life. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't necessarily a spiritual removal or anything like that. It just, I stopped thinking about it, and it was gone. And today, you guys could all be doing whatever. This could be a Dead show. This could be a Grateful Dead show, and everything could be going on, and I wouldn't be attracted to that. That kind of thing. That was just my personal experience. I don't recommend that for everybody, right? I mean, for some people it might take longer, but absolutely the craving goes away. And I guess I would use an analogy. If you've ever had anything in your life that you've changed that was a habit, or that it was something that was central to your life, probably when you first stopped the behavior, you thought about it a lot. Maybe you struggled with it in certain ways. And there were probably certain things that triggered you toward that behavior, whatever it was. I don't know, shopping or something like that. They're trying to make shopping an addiction. I'm not sure if I buy that or not, but it could be. And there could be certain things that would trigger that. And it's the same type of process. Once you step away from it, you get better. You don't live your life like that. But it's really hard for the person who's in the middle of it to understand that. So I could say that to your loved one who's going through this and we do say this to each other in recovery rooms. It's not going to be like this forever. You're going to feel better. You're not going to think about this. This will get easier. And it's very hard for them to get in touch with that.
But when they slip, does that craving start at the same
So it's a
level?
fantastic question. So the question is, let's say that you're in recovery for a while and you slip up. Does that reignite your brain back to the craving level? It depends on how long the slip is and how intense it is and the details of that. If you slip once or twice, it's not going to be like that. If you fall back into what's considered like full-blown substance use disorder, then absolutely you're going to start this process over again. The craving For me personally, and for a lot of people that I've talked to over time, the craving part of this phenomenon is one of the most difficult to deal with. So I would go to bed every night, and I would know that that wasn't a good day, right? That was not a good day. What just went on was not a good day. And, you know, you went to that doctor for the 4th time and told him that somebody stole your medication out of your car. Now, at some point in time, he's going to tell you to lock the car. And so, you know, I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm completely worked up. I go to bed. I'm not going to do that tomorrow. I wake up. By 8:30 in the morning, I can't quit thinking about it. And when I say I can't quit thinking about it, I simply cannot quit thinking about it. By the way, one thing I want to say, if you're in recovery in a room and you share, I want you to share in relation to the family. And if you share too long, I'm going to cut you off. And don't get mad at me about that. I just want to make sure we know this is a family group, right? So if we share for the benefit of the family. All right. So it does go away, though. But it's one of the worst parts of the process. All right, so the next thing about it, a couple other things. So the next part of the argument is you gave it to yourself, Rich. All right, we'll give it to you. You know, your brain changed. Fine. But you gave it to yourself. If you wouldn't have taken that drug, you wouldn't have got addicted. This is something you hear a lot. This is what the trolls on Facebook like to use. You gave it to yourself. You gave it to yourself. Well, if you look at diabetes type 2, we can all agree that type 1 you're born with. Type 2, you give it to yourself. And so the organ that's affected is the pancreas. You put things in your body that you shouldn't over and over and over again. Your pancreas cannot produce insulin, and you experience symptoms. You did it to yourself. But nobody argues whether or not diabetes type 2 is a disease. And when you go to the emergency room or you go to your doctor and you've slipped up with your diabetes regimen, people treat you kind, they level you off, get you a blanket, pat you on the head. Well, I don't know if they do that. Drug and alcohol addiction, the brain is affected, specifically the midbrain. You put things in your body that you shouldn't. You do it over and over again, and over time, you cannot produce dopamine, and you experience symptoms. But if you go to the doctor under this condition, or you go to the emergency room under this condition, not all emergency rooms, you're not necessarily going to get the same treatment. Because is it actually thought of as a disease? Now, we don't have to turn this into a debate in that regard. You could also say it's because of the way we act. I mean, when you get strung out on Twinkies, you don't do what you do whenever you're over here doing this stuff, right? So, all right. Any questions about the disease part of it? Anything that I can clarify, especially if you're new? All right, so we want to get the family and we want to get friends involved. This is why you guys are here. We believe you're a powerful part of the solution. And the reason is because you are closest to the person. This is me out here. This is Rich out here. Hey, come get help. Come get help. Come get help. There's all these layers between me and the person who needs help. Who knows what's going on is family and friends. And I want to emphasize friends. I think one of the things we could do better at Favor, and I would encourage you with your loved one to think of this, friends need to be involved in this conversation too. Now, obviously not the friends that the person's necessarily using with, but even then maybe, right? Because sometimes it's actually a friend. It's not just a using partner. There are some people that we hang with that are using partners, and there are some people that are friends. But family and friends know what's going on. One level out from that, maybe school, work, maybe that's where it starts to show up. We don't want to wait till it gets here. We don't want to wait till a person winds up in ICU or winds up arrested. So this is why we want to educate family and friends. We feel like you are the strongest part of this equation, guys. And that's what happened in my case. I talk about this all the time. My mom and my wife got together. They got on the same page, and it was the beginning of the end. I call it the unholy alliance. And I got into recovery and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Started having kids. All right, let's see. All right, this is what I was telling you about in terms of heavy use versus addiction. As you can see, the orange area, this is problematic, and there are probably a lot of people showing up at Favor who fall into the orange area. There really probably are. Addiction is what I'm going to talk about tonight. But can you see how that would be a blurred area? And can you see that that's a lot of people? But just think about your average college campus on a Saturday night. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? And everybody, it's not just addicted people that are falling into that. What we do is, to be perfectly honest, is we treat these categories essentially the same. Now, this isn't how it should be, but this is how it is. And the reason is we don't want to take any chances, right? Because if I tell a room full of 100 people with a substance use disorder that 30 of you, or let's even say this, that two of you actually aren't addicted, all 100 of us are going to think it's us. So what we do is we paint with a broad brush. And what do? We err on the side of caution. Do you guys get that? But this is really the truest part, and this is why this issue is so common. How many people have heard about denial? It's a big deal, right? It's almost ever present where addiction is concerned. It's always there. And the reason is, guys, is because this stuff. So when your loved one says to you, and this is where you got to really use your imagination, even if the substance is pretty intense. Let's say for argument's sake that the substance is heroin or cocaine or something that maybe falls into this quote-unquote hard drug category. You know, even if that's the case and your loved one says, well, everyone's doing it or so-and-so's doing it, you're overreacting, there probably is some truth to that. There probably is some truth to that. And again, that's why it's so hard for people to move through this process. Now, the thing about denial, so the thing about actually like trying to work with somebody and try to get somebody through denial, how many people by show of hands have dealt with that? Have you dealt with that? You have dealt with that, right? You have to be careful because your instinct when a person is in denial is going to be to what? Confront them. We can't shoot people, Julia. We're going to record, that's not an option. But other than shooting them, it's what? To confront. Your instincts are to confront a person who's in denial because what do you think is going to happen? You think you're going to what? Sort of shake them up. And that they're going to see the error of their ways. If you just tell them sternly enough that drinking 24 beers and doing an 8-ball of cocaine is not appropriate and acceptable behavior, they're going to say, I never thought of that. So, is that actually going to happen? What's going to happen as you confront somebody who's in denial? What's going to happen? They're going to push back, right? And as they push back and as they tell you why what you see is not true, guys, they actually believe it. There's a principle, as you say something out loud, you actually believe it. So if you're telling me that I have a problem with alcohol, and I have a problem with pills, and I'm telling you how I don't have a problem with alcohol, and I don't have a problem with pills, even though I started off with a defensive reaction, the longer I tell you that, the more I believe it. It's a psychological phenomenon. It works in all kinds of different ways. It's why publicly proclaiming a change makes it more likely that a change is going to occur. As you say it out loud to another person, you literally believe it. So now you're telling me I drink too much, I'm telling you how I don't. You're telling me I drink too much, I'm telling you how I don't. And and instead of what? Reversing my denial, what are you doing? You're pushing my denial deeper into me. Do you get that? It's very counterintuitive. Very, very counterintuitive. And literally when I first started working in the field, when I first started working in drug and alcohol treatment, the thing that we were taught to do was to confront and break through denial. And there was no method to the madness there, guys. It was a silly, misinformed, very cliche-driven kind of an idea. It wasn't based on research. It wasn't based on any kind of an approach. It was just sort of like one counselor saying it to another. And so we would... Have you ever heard of the hot seat? Anybody ever hear of the hot seat? You would put somebody in the hot seat and you would confront them and you would quote-unquote tell them about themselves. You're a liar, cheater, and a thief. You're a terrible father. You're a terrible mom. That kind of stuff. With the idea that we're going to shake them up and we're going to get them to see this. And that permeated popular culture. And so the movies that came out about addiction and alcoholism had that flavor to it. And when you guys who were family members talked to counselors, you heard them talk like this and you thought to yourself, these guys are professionals, this must be how it is. And so there became this model of addiction recovery that was, I got to extract a pound of flesh. These addicts and alcoholics are terrible people. They're liars, cheaters, and thieves at the core. How many people have heard things like this? If an alcoholic's lips are moving, they're lying. You've heard that. How many people have heard this? Alcoholics and addicts are manipulators. So here's the deal. I'm about to say something highly controversial. There are a lot of people who are not addicts and alcoholics who lie more than addicts and alcoholics. Yeah. Okay, let's get this clear, man. Addicts and alcoholics do not have the market cornered on lying, cheating, and stealing. Let's get real clear about that. I was not a liar, cheater, and a thief. Did I ever do that? Yeah, but you know what? I don't know that I did it. There are people, my counselor was preaching to me. I looked at that dude. That guy was stealing stuff. I can tell you what he was stealing. He was stealing Krispy Kreme donuts. The dude weighed about 450 pounds. He used to talk to me about discipline. And I'd say, discipline? Get on a freaking treadmill one day, dude. That has nothing to do with anything. I just had a flashback. Sorry, I had a flashback right there. My fault. But do you guys get the idea? Now, I want to camp out here for a minute and tell you that if your loved one has been stealing from you, if this has been going on forever, if this has been going on repeatedly, if they've lied to you over and over again, if they've taken advantage of you over and over again, you're going to need to set boundaries. But you don't have to set boundaries in a punishing way. It's going to do no good. You're going to set boundaries to protect yourself, actually in a measured, under control kind of way. Has nothing to do with extracting a pound of flesh. I think I shared this last week. I've just been thinking about this conversation. I talked about how I was an interventionist. And our intervention model is an invitational model where we actually get the person to come. We don't sneak up on them. We tell them we're going to have the intervention. We invite them to it. They come almost 100% of the time. The family always says they're never going to show, but no good alcoholic or drug addict wants you in a room talking about them without them being there. So they usually come. I had this one brother call. It was a brother called. I think I did say this last week. He called and he wanted to do an intervention on his brother, and I explained our model, and he literally said, that's too easy, that's too soft. And I said, well, you want to extract a pound of flesh? And he said, yes, I do. You get that? And what I want to tell you is you're entitled to your feelings, and if that's where you're at with this, I respect you and I don't judge you for that, but I want to tell you, it's going to make everything worse if you approach it like that. If you approach it like that. It's going to, because what it's going to do is it's going to lead to, you're not going to be able to think clearly. You're going to make all these statements and do all these things and have all these behaviors and act out yourself, and it's just not going to it's not going to move the needle on anything. So think about that. So what do we talk about? We talk about boundaries. We talked a little bit about this last week. Not rules, not controlling another person, protecting yourself. Personal boundaries, team boundaries. I'm going to go through this quickly to get to where we were last week. These are the typical areas that people are involved in. We kind of put it loosely into two categories: financial influence or financial boundaries and emotional boundaries. Paying the rent would be a financial example. Taking phone calls from people when they're verbally abusive would be an example of a boundary that you set to stop that behavior on the emotional end. Boundaries are for you, but they can many times influence. You got to get on the same page. This is just a graph about that. And you got to have the right people in the conversation. This is a little hard to see, but if this is the person with addiction, you got to make sure you have the people closest to the person in the conversation. I call it the girlfriend phenomenon, right? If he's living with his girlfriend and mom and dad think he needs to go to rehab, but the girlfriend thinks it's good to go, you probably don't have a lot of influence over that situation. Or it could be a wife or what have you. Two ends of the extreme: kick the bum out. And then the other end is, it's no big deal. We didn't like that silverware anyway. Did I use that last week? I think I did. Define the target. Make sure you're talking. Make sure you're on the same page. Make sure you're talking about what needs to be changed. And then try to learn how to become focused in the middle of chaos. Addiction thrives in chaos. Addiction thrives in chaos and conflict. Arguing, fighting, storming out of houses, taking things, being here, never being where we're, just complete 100% chaos and mayhem. That's where we want to be when we're dealing with it. I think we talked about the rules of communication last week, did we? Basic stuff, guys. Respect one another. Did we talk about these 3 points? When you want to communicate something to somebody about anything, so if you want to talk to your loved one about how you feel about their substance use disorder, there's 3 aspects to communication. 1 is what you want to say, 2 is what you actually say, and 3 is what they actually hear. And it can break down any point in time on that continuum, right? How many people have had something in their head, their loved one comes in the door, or maybe it's a coworker, or maybe you're a boss dealing with an employee, you literally are thinking about how you're going to say it. Have you ever done this? You have it in your head. Here's what I'm going to say when my daughter comes in. And then she sits down and you start talking, and like literally like almost the complete opposite comes out of your mouth. And you wish hey, if there was one superpower, I don't know what you guys would choose, but if I had one superpower, I was thinking about this today a lot. If I had one superpower, it would be that I would be able to hit a pause button and rewind my life like 5 minutes. Seriously, think about that. That would be a fantastic, because that's whenever you could take that back. But have you ever, it's coming out of your mouth and you just want to grab it and pull it back. And then they react to what you say, and then it turns in, and then they don't hear what you said.
Right, that's a big problem.
They don't hear what you said is a big problem. What contributes to them not being able to hear what you said is also what they're dealing with in their brain, right? We talked about that part of the process. So if you know that they're going to have difficulty translating things or hearing things the right way, what kind of principles do you want to bring to the communication about boundaries? What would logic tell you about that? You want to keep it what? Simple as can be. Had a person on Facebook reach out to me the other day. Her son was coming out of a rehab and the therapist wanted them to do a contract. How many people here have done a contract? Usually do it for adolescents. But it's usually like 17 or 18 pages of behaviors. You will be in at a certain time. You will make your bed. You will not leave the plate on the coffee table anymore. You know, you will be respectful to your mother. You will be respectful to your father. You will not listen to rap music. You will no longer have a beard. You know, it's all these different things. And it just sets the family up for disaster. The person can't think clearly. Simple, to the point, and I would just focus on like maybe one boundary at a time. It's usually related to using that kind of thing. Any questions about the communication pattern? Does that all make sense? All right. So if boundaries come down to saying no, we talked about this last week. If we know we should say no, if you're new to the group, you may still be struggling with what to do. You may still be struggling with what to do because you may not be sure what you're dealing with. I tell you, if you come to this group 2 or 3 times in a row, you will know exactly what to do. The problem with family recovery is never what to do, it's how to do it. So I'll just give the scenario is your son or daughter is living in the basement, they're paying no rent, they're using crack cocaine, they're drinking, they're tearing the family apart. You know what you should do. That person should not be living in your basement. The problem isn't what do I do, it's how do I do it. And really the problem is what gets in the way of me taking the action that I should take related to this behavior. Now I just gave you an extreme example. It's not always like that, guys. Sometimes it's not nearly as intense as that. Sometimes it's like, should I let this person live here when they're going out all night? And it keeps me up all night. You get where I'm like, I don't want to make it sound like there are all these situations that are that intense and that every boundary is all about kicking a person out of their house. It's not. But I will tell you this, every boundary involves you telling somebody no. And every boundary involves them not liking what you're saying. You get that part of it. There is no way in the world to get a teenager to take the trash out without them being pissed off about it. And there's no way, that was a joke, guys.
No, it's not.
And there's no way in the world to set a boundary with the other person liking the boundary. It's like, hey, Rich, you're not allowed, hey, you're not going to be allowed to live here if you're going to continue to smoke marijuana. And I'm like, thank you very much, Mom. That's not how it is, right? What is it going to be met with? Anger, frustration, justification, argument. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's going to be met with straight up intimidation. Punching holes in drywall, throwing coffee cups, whatever it might be. And so we have to talk about what actually gets in the way of saying no. And that's the goal of these next few lectures that we have. It's all going to be all about, last week we talked about guilt as being one of the levels. Did we get there last week? Did we talk about guilt? Oh, remember this picture? That's Facebook. That's a Facebook thing right there. You got the mom and the baby, everything's cool, but she's living in a trap house. Check that out. All right, mean what you say. We talked about guilt. Did we talk about shame?
Yes.
Okay, so we didn't. Let's talk about fear today. All right, So the other thing, guilt, shame can keep us from saying no. Another area, and this came up a lot last week, people said fear keeps them from saying no. And so let's start off with getting clarification between fear and anxiety. So fear is a very basic emotion. It happens in the moment, and it's triggered by something. You're walking through the woods, and there's a grizzly bear. You don't have to think about it. Right? You don't have to like evaluate. It's right there. Boom. It's a base level instinctual response. It's literally what's called fight or flight. The amygdala fires, sends adrenaline, and what do? You run. Same thing could happen if you're walking down a dark alley. Now, there are things based on our experience that'll trigger fear in certain people and not in others. We can agree to that too. But do you get how fear is a base reaction? I'm here to tell you, you're probably not really dealing with fear. You're probably dealing with anxiety. Anxiety is anticipatory in nature. It's not the actual it's not the actual threat that's right in front of you. It's not that the grizzly bear is right there. That's fear. Anxiety is, I can't walk in the woods anymore because there's grizzly bears. Do you get that? Do you get the two things? When you go through this with your loved one and it first happens, like let's say when you first find out that they overdosed or you first hear that they go to jail, that's probably the fear response. But everything else is probably not fear, it's probably anxiety. I'm saying that like a statement, maybe it should be more of a question. What do you guys think about that concept or that idea? And I'm going to go through some more exercise, but how does it fit off the bat? Does that make sense at all? Yes.
So if a parent is afraid that their kid is going to kill themselves, if they kick them out of the house, that's a fear.
That's not a fear, that's anxiety. Unless the person is standing there with a gun in their hand right now.
So how do you address
because, well, here's the good news. Anxiety is much, much easier to address than fear. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Like, look at this list. Fear is a basic emotion. You can't get rid of basic emotions. So there are people who are born without fear. I don't know if you know that or not. There are literally people who are born without an amygdala. They do not have the ability to fear. That is not a good thing. Okay? Not a good thing at all. So, Carol, you can't really remove fear from yourself. There's no therapeutic technique to allow you to remove fear. However, there's 1,000,001 ways to remove anxiety. And so I'm here tonight to propose the idea that you're not actually dealing with fear in most cases. You're dealing with anxiety, because what it is it's a down the road future threat rather than an immediate threat. Unless, of course, like I said, unless the person's like literally in the hospital right that moment, and I'm afraid she's going to die. She's in the hospital right this moment. That's probably fear. But that's not what I hear a lot from people. I mean, I hear people create scenarios in their mind on what's going to happen with their loved one if they set the boundary, and then they would say, I'm afraid this is going to happen. You're not actually afraid, you're anxious this is going to happen. And that's good, because I'm going to talk about how you can try to deal with anxiety, whereas you can't really deal with fear. You know, and again, fear you have no control over. Boom, it's going to hit you. Now, I want to say this one more time. Everybody's not afraid of the same things, right? And as you get exposed to certain circumstances, you tend to have less fear. And if you've been hurt in certain circumstances, you tend to have more fear. So if you've walked in the woods and seen the grizzly bear, you're more likely to be jumpy, you're more likely to be fearful if you see a cow. That's weird, huh? Hey, I saw cows in the woods behind my house in Pennsylvania. Have I told you all this? I tell stories in this group, guys. I'm sorry. I have this house in Pennsylvania. This has nothing to do with anything. We just got to relax. This is hard. This is hard stuff we're dealing with. We're going to tell a story here for a minute. All right, so my house in Pennsylvania, literally, the mountains, surrounding it is mountains and woods. There is no farm and there's no pasture. There were 3 freaking cows in the woods behind my house. Somebody explain that to me. What is that? That is a wild mountain cow?
There's a farm, you just don't
There's no farm. It is a ninja mountain cow, freaky, weird thing going on in my life. All right. All right. Instantaneous. Now let's go through some scenarios. Let's go through some scenarios and let's try to figure out whether or not these common thoughts that people report, whether or not they're fear or anxiety, and there's no right or wrong answer. This is my loved one is going to die. Is that fear or is that anxiety? It's probably anxiety. It could be fear if literally it's going down right in front of you. How many people have had a loved one wind up in the hospital for anything? It's probably like a legitimate fear at that point, right? Or let's say, for example, your loved one is drunk, grabs the keys, and goes out and gets in the car. It's probably like a legitimate fear at that point. In general, though, if you're walking around and you kind of have that feeling or you have that predisposition, that's anxiety. Do you get the difference between the two? And again, I'm going to talk about how you can deal with the two, and I'm going to talk about how you deal with anxiety. That's why I'm trying to get you to sort of see the difference. My loved one is going to jail. What do you think about this? Similar situation, probably anxiety. Remember, in order for it to be fear, there needs to be a base response on your part in terms of a perceived threat. I guess the threat here would be what's going to happen to him when he's in jail. But do you understand how that actually requires a train of thought? In order for you to be worried about what's going to happen to your loved one in jail, or in order for you to be upset, it actually requires a series of thoughts. It's not an automatic response. Because it can't be he's going to jail. It has to be what? He's going to jail. His roommate's going to do something to him. You follow me? So on and so forth. And any time there is a series of thoughts, guys, that's good because that's what you can interrupt. Whereas you can't really, again, you cannot really interrupt a basic response. My loved one's going to get fired. These are all examples of things that people say that they're afraid of, but it's actually anxiety. My loved one is going to relapse, definitely anxiety, definitely future oriented. My loved one stopped going to meetings, bad things are going to happen. I don't have this up here, but another one is if your loved one is in rehab, you will get very, very anxious about what's going to happen after they come out of rehab. And a lot of times you'll label it as fear. You'll say, I'm afraid of what's going to happen when so-and-so comes out of rehab. My loved one is out there using with his knucklehead friends again. Knucklehead. My loved one, oh, that's about a girl. My loved one is with that bad boy again. That's for me. All right. So, what can you do? If it's fear, it's kind of hard, right? There's not much you can do. You could run, obviously, if it's something after you, but like if you're afraid for your loved one, you can't really remove that if it's fear. There are certain things you can do to calm yourself down, and we can add to this. You guys can add to this, but one of the biggest things is breathing. Breathe. Take a breath. Try to calm yourself. You can try to remove the danger. This is interesting. If being around the person causes this fear response, maybe he's threatening you, that kind of thing, maybe you want to get him away from you. Does that make sense? Seek advice and support and seek safety. Debrief the whole thing. Talk through it with somebody. If it's anxiety, I'm going to talk about the ABCD model. Make sure you make an accurate assessment of the threat. Think it through. Here's one of the things that's going on, guys. In today's world, and this is very important that I say this the right way, because there is a real threat of death due to overdose that is unprecedented in the history of substance use disorders. Unprecedented. But still, guys, the overwhelming majority of people who use substances are not going to overdose. Do you follow that? Statistically speaking. Now, the only reason why I'm saying that is I'm trying to get... It's kind of like the exercise people do about airplanes crashing. Although that's a bad analogy because very few airplanes... But do you understand the principle of really trying to assess the situation? Getting in touch with how things go down? And accurate... Other things that can help with anxiety, meditation. Meditation is a preventative process. Yoga. I'm not a fan of yoga, although I don't have anything against you doing it. I'm just not going to do it. Breathing. There are psychiatric medications that can help with anxiety. There are not psychiatric medications that can keep you from being afraid. Does that make sense? You don't want to take psychiatric medications that will keep you from being afraid. Does anyone want to add to this list? Anything I'm missing? Anything anyone would add to either one of these lists that they do that can help with anxiety and or fear? Exercise is preventative for sure. Walking, that kind of stuff. Therapy, talking. You can make your own list with this, right? All right, let's talk about the skill of recognizing irrational thinking and confronting it. REBT, a base model, ABCD. It always starts with an activating event. I'm going to give a very low level, kind of non-dangerous example, but you can put anything in there. The activating event is what happens that gets you revved up. So you text your daughter, and she doesn't text you back for 10 minutes when she usually texts back within the first 15 seconds. Okay? That's all that happens. So, the consequence is a full-blown panic attack. You throw the phone against the wall. You're angry at everybody around you. You go into an anxiety-ridden episode because of this. And you think that your daughter not responding to the text drove you to that. But REBT says it's not the actual event, it's your belief about the event. It's the story you tell yourself about the event. Something catastrophic happened, she's kidnapped, using on her way to Belize. I don't know why I said that. No idea why. I literally don't know why I said on her way to Belize. What is that, a country? Okay, what never been there, don't know what anything about it. Like, there's some kind of premonition going on here. So it's not the event, it's your belief about the event. And you can put anything in there. You can put anything in there. And the key is to recognize that and dispute the belief. Here's another explanation for this. The phone went dead. Here's another explanation for this. Maybe they weren't drinking tonight. Maybe they really were just over at Joey's house. Here's another explanation for this. And the reason is what? You're not trying to allow your loved one to get away with anything, quote unquote. What are you doing? You're trying to calm yourself. You're trying to take the edge off yourself. You're trying to actually have a decent night. You're trying to go to sleep many times, right? Anything can be put in here. And obviously some of these instances are going to be easier to dispute than others. There are going to be some things that you can't dispute. There are going to be some things that are just bad, and they are bad, and you're supposed to be upset about it. Any questions or thoughts about that model? Does anyone feel like they try to do that? So, Carol?
Can I go back to the question I just said related to this? The parent who's worried that because their kids said, if you kick me out of my apartment, I'm going to kill myself.
Okay.
How can we relate to that?
All right. Well, let's do it. Let's do this. Let's go over here. The activating event is the accident. You have to, first of all, you have to identify the activating event. The activating event is what? They said, if you kick me out, I will kill myself, right? That's the activating event. And that person that you're working with that told you that says that when the person says that, they immediately feel anxiety. So the consequence is full-blown panic attack, anxiety, all that stuff. You have to find out, and so the belief is, see, this does, do you guys recognize what's going on here? She didn't even kick him out yet. Do you follow me? So the belief is future-oriented. So this is, so really the belief is, if I kick him out, he will kill himself. Now hold on. Now this is, well, the dispute is, well, you didn't kick him out. You get it? Do you follow me? So really the activating event, this is absolutely genius. You guys are witnessing genius at work. I don't mean me, I mean this model. The activating event is not if you kick him out. The activating event is talking about what to do with my kid. The consequence is full-blown. And the belief is, this is good, the belief is if I talk about it, I have to do it. Or something like that. If you start talking to her, you're going to get into this. Do you follow me?
No.
Oh, Jesus. Excuse me. Gee whiz. Come on, Carol. All right, look, let's go back over here.
Have they hurt themselves before, possibly?
Wait. This is what you said. The person saying, if the son says, the activating event is if I kick myself out, if you kick me out, I will kill myself, right?
That's the activating event. That's what sends the parent.
But she hasn't kicked them out, is what I'm saying.
No, but she's thinking about it.
So the activating event is actually thinking about kicking her kid out. That's what I was saying, right?
Okay.
Do you get where I'm coming from? So do you guys get this?
Yeah.
The activating event is actually thinking about kicking. I said talking about. You could say kicking. You could say thinking about. And the belief is what? You'd have to ask her about what the belief is, but it must be something like, if I talk about it, I have to do it. You see what I'm saying?
In my case, it was if I go file the papers to evict them, then they're gonna kill me.
So if I go file the papers to evict them.
Because once I sign my name,
Now, if you go do it and you have the panic attack, that's a different story. If you go do it, if she goes and does it, Carol, then the belief is that the person's going to kill themselves. Do you follow me?
Okay, I get you now.
Do you get me there?
Yeah.
But here you'd have to actually talk to the person and say, what is it about this situation where talking about it actually makes you anxious? Because all you're doing is talking about it. You know? And it might be, if I talk about it, do I have to do it? Like this belief that it's inevitable then. And if that's the case, you would want to just reassure. You could talk about it all day without doing anything. Leslie?
What if there was reoccurring self-harm prior to that?
So it's a good point. So her question was, what if there's reoccurrent self-harm, or somebody else said a reoccurring attempt? I think somebody there said it. And so absolutely, you're going to have experiences that make this stronger, right? You're going to have experiences that are going to make this almost impossible to dispute. Does that part make sense? So let's say, for example, that you've kicked your loved one out of the house 4 times, and all 4 times they've tried to hurt themselves. And I'm sitting here to tell you, and you like dispute the belief that, and tell yourself that they might not hurt themselves. You're going to look at me like I'm crazy, because the past predicts the future. So we have to acknowledge that this is going to be very difficult based on the circumstances. But I want to finish this thought with Carol. Do you get where what I'm talking about? If you can't do REBT until you actually identify what the activating event is. And the activating event is either talking or thinking about kicking her son out, because she hasn't actually kicked her son out yet. Right? So now once you kick the kid out, it now becomes a whole different ballgame. That the activating event is I kicked my kid out. The belief is he's going to die on the streets. The consequences, anxiety, worry, can't sleep at night. You follow me? But until you do it, it's actually, first of all, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe the person is just talking about it. If it is a problem and they're reporting anxiety about talking about it, it must be because they think that they have to do it or something like that. Or maybe they think just talking about it creates something bad. Do you follow that? Do you guys get that? And I think that's where if you're going through this and you're trying to save yourself aggravation, part of this is you taking care of yourselves. Remember, part of family groups is you get, then you have to start saying to yourself this type of stuff, and you have to start asking, do I even want to talk about this anymore? That's an interesting idea. I'm either going to kick him out or I'm not going to kick him out, but one thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about it forever without doing something.
what does REBT stand for?
Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. Yes.
Well, I mean, does it also just have to be an emotional response? If they're threatening to kill themselves, another one would be to actually have them committed because they are in danger.
Well, this is you're talking about a response that you could have that was rational. This is saying, how do you help a person who's having an irrational response?
Well, I mean, but even though they're being irrational, doesn't mean you can't do something that's rational.
This would be for the parent who is being irrational, is what I'm saying.
Oh.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. If the person's doing it, you can respond and you can do whatever you need to do. What I'm trying to get in touch with is, how do you guys condition yourself basically to have a better night? What can you do on any given time and any given occasion to have a better experience, right? Because there's a lot of legitimate stuff to worry about. If you're worrying about illegitimate stuff, you want to try to get that off your table. Does that make sense? Carol, I want to make sure we wrap this up because I feel like that's a really important distinction between the two things. Let's go through. If a person is talking, let's just take your case off the table. If a person is talking about kicking their loved one out, and they're reporting that it's causing anxiety and they can't sleep at night because they're talking about kicking their kid out, stop talking about kicking your kid out. Get it? Stop talking to your coach about it. Stop talking about the meeting. Literally say to yourself, I'm either going to do it or I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to bat this around because every time I have this conversation with my sponsor before I go to bed, I don't sleep at night. Or every time I go to FAVOR group and they make me talk about it, I can't sleep. Don't talk about it because that's what's going on. It's not, because you can't have anxiety about something that hasn't happened yet. You can't create a scenario, or let me rephrase that. You can't have anxiety about what your kid does whenever you kick him out if you haven't kicked him out yet. I mean, I guess you could. Anybody want to weigh in on this? How would you help somebody with this particular scenario? Because I feel like this happens a lot. Yes?
I kicked my daughter out. And I thought the same thing, that she would kill herself, she'd be on the street, but she's not.
So,
That's the best thing I can say.
so the activating event would actually be thinking about it. Let's change it to thinking about it, right? Thinking about it. And we know what it means, right? Kicking the person out. And the consequence is what? Anxiety attack. So what would the belief be? What would the belief about thinking about it be that would make you anxious? If you believe this model, that's how it would have to go down.
For me, it was after I thought about it, then finding out how to do it. And, you know, it was, let's take this one step at a time before we kick her out.
So maybe the belief was kind of like, oh my gosh, what's next? Right? There's a lot of steps involved here. Do you get where I'm coming from? You'd have to figure out what's actually creating the anxiety for the person. If you believe in this, now if you don't believe in this type of model, if you don't believe that thoughts, this is 100% founded on the principle that thoughts produce emotions, and in turn produce actions that produce further thoughts that produce further emotions. Yes?
Like I make, like sometimes I put it in, like I'm playing out a movie without having all the actors in it.
Yeah.
Like it's only my truth and my assumption on a behavior or an action that I have to take, and then it puts a lot of untruths because I don't know what that action's gonna play out as. I'm just assuming.
So it's a really interesting conversation, guys, as you guys dig into it as family members dealing with addiction. What you start to find out is that part of the problem is to even figure out what it is that's kind of like revving you up. Because we as helpers, and myself as a family member who've gone through this, I have probably made assumptions about situations where this is what's happening, but it sounds like it's multi-layered, like what you just said, ma'am, about this, that you almost got anxiety about what comes next, and I got to do all this stuff, and you know, but if you're gonna use this, you have to really identify this part of it, this part of like what is the belief about the situation that's getting you worked up, and it's probably different than what instinctually you would say. And it's very interesting because it goes multi-layers. It goes into creating all these different kind of scenarios, right? And it's probably not simple. Julia?
Well, I was going to say that, I've been coming to FAVOR for a while, and as you know, I bounce back and forth. I didn't stick with boundaries with my daughter for a long time, but lately I have, and I can tell a huge difference in just my own day-to-day path. I'm sleeping better.
Yeah. I'm
not eating better, but I'm progressing. But my daughter always had that fear too. She's a cutter, and every time I would throw up some boundaries, she would threaten the same thing. I'm going to kill myself. Blah 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 blah. 3 months ago, I left her at the hospital. I walked away and left her there, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. She's still alive.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. I can't predict the future, but a lot of it was I fell for that. She knew I would fall for it. Emotionally, I would be like, oh, and I would instinctively want to protect her.
Right. So your belief was she's going to do it,
Right.
right?
And that's what made me keep dropping those boundaries, because it was like replaying that movie scene over and over in my head.
Sounds like this is a relatively common one. Threats to hurt yourself, right?
Right.
And what you're identifying, Julia, is in that case, the belief was she's going to do it. And I would imagine that that's happened for a lot of us in here, right? So that's a really, and then the consequence is you let her do whatever she wants. She gets what you guys follow that. You'd have to and this is a hard one to dispute. That is a super difficult one to dispute, right? Because you have to. Now, I want to comment on one other thing that Julia said and get your opinion on it. Do you think with anything, once you do it once, does it make it easier to do it twice? Does it make it easier to do it 10 times? So there's also this idea of you can actually get used to doing, setting the boundaries and saying no. You can get used to it the longer you do it. If you're right-handed and I tell you to go up to that board and write your name left-handed, the first time you do it, it's going to be horrible. But if I have you do it 100 times, by the 100th time, it's going to be legible. And so the first time you do boundaries, you're probably not going to do very well with this. The first time you call somebody out on that, it's probably going to be ugly. You're probably not going to sleep all night. You're probably going to stand there beside their bed and just stare at them, waiting for them to move. And, and then, but if you do it over and over and over again, you probably get better at it, that kind of thing. Yes?
I've had two family members who have threatened suicide. I'm
Yeah.
gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself. And I found in both situations they were using it as a manipulative tool to control the other person's behavior.
Yeah.
And in counseling, and I was anxious, but in counseling I was told, leave it alone. If they're gonna kill themselves, you can't stop them from killing themselves.
So
It wasn't in response to what I did, it was just a means of control.
yeah, so I want to tell you Favor's official take on that. If somebody's threatening suicide, even if they're bluffing, call 911. And if they threaten again, call 911 again. I would never tell anybody not to do anything. I just don't agree with that. That's just my personal take. I would say call. Eventually the cops are going to get mad and they're going to take them somewhere. And the idea is if they're bluffing, it makes it less likely they're going to do it again. And if they're telling the truth, then they have the help that they need. So we would just recommend that you actually call 911, and then you don't do anything else about it. You did your part. But I get where the person was coming from. The idea was don't react to it. Don't let them control you. Yes, ma'am.
So Rich, I think some of the anxiety also comes from knowing what you should do. In other words, you say, I know I should kick him out.
Yes.
But I don't know that I can kick him out.
Right.
This is what I'm afraid of. So I think it's that internal.
It's that internal strife.
Yes.
It's definitely multi-layered. This is very, very good conversation and very clear that when it comes to talking yourself through a situation, you actually probably have to talk yourself through multiple situations. Because it sounds to me like what's going on, and the more I think about this, is definitely the case in my life. When you start running through these scenarios or these anxiety-producing circumstances with your loved one, it takes on a lot of rabbit trails. It takes on a lot of different scenarios, a lot of what-ifs. Leslie, it sounds like that's what you're saying, that there's a lot of different scenes to your movie. And there's a lot of different players and a lot of different characters. And this could wind up a lot of different ways. If that's the case, then you're going to have to work through it, maybe instance to instance, circumstance to circumstance. Do you get the general idea of trying to dispute irrational beliefs? Disputing irrational beliefs reduces anxiety. Now, I do want to talk about a couple other things because I want to make sure that I differentiate between quote-unquote normal anxiety or everyday anxiety and what's been labeled an anxiety disorder, right? How many people, have you heard of a generalized anxiety disorder is one of the most common? So this is just how this graph plays it out. You can put anything in there. Like anxiety would be, normal everyday anxiety would be worrying about paying the bills because maybe you're short in your paycheck. It's a circumstance, it produces it. It's not really fear, it's just always there. Anxiety disorder would be when it's constant, continuous, and never goes away. Do you guys get the difference? You know, now you have to start to ask yourself, and this is because family members can suffer serious consequences around their loved one's addiction. Serious consequences. Your own mental health can be impacted by this. Anxiety disorder, what else? Depression. Stress-related disorders where you don't sleep at night. And you might need to seek support if you feel like you have this going on. So what would be an example of this? Everyday anxiety about your loved one would be it pops in and out, it's on you a little bit. Maybe you don't get a text message, you get wound up. But where it starts to move into an anxiety disorder is if it's constant, ever present, and it never lets up. If you feel like you're thinking about this or worried about this or it's on your mind like every day, all day, now you're moving into an area where your brain has become assimilated to this and literally it can't stop itself. It's like a runaway train. And this is where you have to start thinking, do I need to go to therapy? Do I need to go to therapy and actually start digging into some of this and really try to work through? Because this isn't just everyday anxiety about a bad situation. This is morphed into something else. I mean, yes, sir.
I think depending on where you personally come from, enters in this too, because if you've come from your childhood or somewhere in your growing years out of some traumatic experience, you're going to be prone to this.
Oh, yeah.
Even more so than the average person.
Yeah.
You've got to get yourself squared, or else this stuff will drive you nuts.
Yes. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but the idea is your personal background and your personal experiences growing up, especially with things like trauma, will also make you more vulnerable to this, and it also will influence how you want to attack this issue. So the trauma part of it, and I think this is very important. This is also where getting a therapist can be very, very helpful. You know, when I start going through what I'm going through, right, I'm dealing with some stuff, and I'm dealing with all these different issues and uncertainty about what's going to go on with my kid, you know, and all the stuff that you guys are experiencing, staying up all night, all the scenarios. I can so relate to the movie. And I'm going through that, I'm working through that. I have got to acknowledge how growing up in an alcoholic home with all the unpredictability, and I got to tell you something, I learned how to create movies at a very early age. I learned how to read a room at a very early age, at a very young age, because you had to in my house. It was survival. It was physically dangerous in my home. So I had to be on my toes. I had to never be relaxed. Do you see how that could be triggered and brought to the front when I get into a fearful situation with my kid? And so now what I do is, you know, I guess because I'm a therapist and I know that therapy works, I immediately jump right back into therapy. I'm talking like that day, like even before I identify that I need to go to therapy, I automatically call the therapist and I get back in with her. And I get back in there and, you know, I start working on that stuff because I'm probably not going to think that away. That's more basic. Like that's a real basic level kind of response on my part. And so you want to, if you feel like you're experiencing this side of the coin, if you feel like you're in that zone where it won't go away, then maybe what you want to do is start thinking about, do you get your own therapist? A coach will help. Now, a coach is not designed to dig into that deep stuff. So don't expect your coach at Favor to help you resolve the stuff that I just said. Actually, if they try to do that, you should probably let me know. You know, because that's not their job. They can listen to you. They can listen to you about anything. You guys get that? But that's not their job to try to figure that out or take you down that road. I think this is an incredibly important point. I'm so glad that you said it. I really want you guys to, as you leave here and you start working through this and you start thinking about the scenarios that you're dealing with your kids or with your spouse or with whatever it is, friend, whatever the loved one situation is, that you start to think about, is there anything from your past that's going to make this situation even harder to overcome? The typical things are growing up in an alcoholic home yourself, or maybe you had a brother or a sister or an uncle that experienced similar issues, and all that garbage that's going to get triggered. Remember how that works, guys, right? It just sits there, and it's just waiting for, you know, for the right thing to snap it off. And so that you might want to look at it that way. Again, that's very hard to do when you're dealing with your loved one because you want to get your loved one better. A lot of you guys came here tonight because you want to figure out how to get your loved one better. One of the best ways that you can help your loved one is get yourself better. Linda.
We need to get the pass around.
Oh!
And then we have some new people over here.
Let's get that pass. Let's get that. What'd you call it? A pass around? Is that a southern thing? Let's get that pass around. Get that pass around going over there. I'm not sure about that pass around, but if you get a chance, can you send that clipboard? Yes.
What's the difference between a counselor and a therapist?
Oh, nothing really. It's just name. It's just a name. She asked, "What's the difference between a counselor and a therapist?" Nothing really. You know, some people just use the term therapist. You'll hear people use the term drug and alcohol counselor way more than drug and alcohol therapist. That kind of deal. I would tell you that my recommendation for finding a therapist is the website or the site called Psychology Today. Because it vets us, it puts us on there. It's just a good resource. It's Psychology Today. You Google it, and you go there, you put your zip code in, and it'll kick all the therapists in the area. We can help you find it too. Yes?
What I was going to say before is that your coach, the FAVOR coach, may not be the best person to help you do that.
Right.
To identify inside your life. But certainly can be a good person to identify or to
Yes.
suggest that you do that.
Yes, and also help you find somebody. So your coach might not be the person where you finally land with that, but they can help steer you in the right direction, that kind of thing. And you also got to remember, like, therapy is very different for people. Don't go into therapy with a preconceived idea of exactly what this looks like. Like, don't go into therapy, for example, thinking you got to be there for a year. Like, when I go for therapy, like, I go in and I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it. I want to get it done. Let's go. 6-8. They know 6 or 8 sessions. We're going to roll through this, and I am not guarded in any kind of way. Do you follow me? I go in there. I'm an open book. You know, boom. How does this relate? Work through it. That's just how it works for me, right? You got to look around. You got to find people that you're comfortable with. That kind of thing. If you have somebody in your life already that you're working with, though, continue with that person. Let's talk about trauma real quick, because this is what this is really coming down to. This is coming down to trauma. This is a very good quote. If you've ever been bitten by a snake, you're afraid even of a piece of rope. And it's the idea that the experiences that we have growing up, or actually it's not even growing up, it could be even as adults, that in some cases what happens, they get stuck and they influence us in life. They kind of get stuck there, they get easily triggered. And the thing about memories, guys, you got to remember, memories can be triggered by any of the senses. Do you get that? Most people try to think of memories as, I can remember this, and they try to have a picture in their mind. What they have to remember is that smell can trigger a memory. Touch can trigger a memory. Music and sound can trigger a memory. The wind can trigger a memory. Anything, that memory is literally in your mind intact. An emotion, this is very important, an emotion can trigger a memory. An emotional feeling can trigger a past traumatic experience. So let's think for a minute about what I described that I went through. What would have happened when I was worried about my daughter, when I was going through that, that could have triggered? Well, it really wasn't the experience itself, because that wasn't the same, right? It wasn't smell, it wasn't sight, it wasn't music, it was the feeling. It was the feeling of what? Being out of control. It was the feeling of what's going to happen to me, not what am I going to be able to do. Do you get that? And that feeling triggered all that other stuff. So that's where getting in touch with, like, those past experiences. Trauma literally just means a wound that won't heal. Trauma can also be small t experiences. It's not always sexual abuse, physical abuse, or extreme neglect. Those are the ones people think of. It can also be bullying in school. It can be divorce. It can be financial bankruptcy. Growing up in poverty is a big, big trigger for people. If you've ever known anybody who's grown up in poverty and then been able to kind of like improve their life, and you want to get punched in the face, go talk to them about money, right? Go talk to them and try to encourage them to spend their money a little bit more. Go ask them for money if you're rich, you know, for donations. What happens there? What's going on when you ask somebody for money who's had that past experience of poverty? It's not about the money you're asking for, is it? It's about the feeling they had when they were a kid and the electric got turned off. So that's what you're trying to get in touch with, and that's what a therapist can help with. If you can here's what's interesting, if you can get in touch with it, you can start to work through it, and it can start to lose some of its power over you. If you don't ever talk about it, though, it sort of lays there dormant, and really it can run your life if you think about it. And it can happen, and it can be even beyond dealing with your loved one. You can start to experience things, and you'll start to act it out in other areas of your life, and you might not even know why. Anger would be an example of that. Pushing people away in relationships would be an example. Now, grief in and of itself can be traumatic too, right? If you've lost somebody, you've experienced trauma. And if we can camp out here for a minute, if you've lost somebody and you're dealing with addiction, it's likely that some of that stuff about loss is probably getting stirred up. Does that make sense? Because this is a life-threatening issue. So you're going through it, and if you've lost somebody, you're probably getting stirred up in that area of grief. And sometimes there's not a good way to go through that. The thing about grief that's interesting is it's one of the hardest areas to help a person through, because there's nothing really good to say to a person who's going through loss. Would you guys agree with that? And have you ever been in a situation where you're talking to somebody and they're telling you about what happened, and you know, you feel like just completely 100% inept because you have no idea what to say? And the thing is that like there is nothing to say. So if you're dealing with this, a couple things, a couple principles, a couple ideas, talking about things, in general, talking about loss will make it better. There are rituals and ceremonies that we use that help us through loss. Writing letters to people, that kind of thing. You know, closure is important where loss is concerned. You know what I mean by closure? You know, get the house put away, get the estate taken care of. You'll hear people talk a lot that they didn't feel like this chapter of their life was closed until they were able to move through it and everything was put in order. Now you get into a situation where you can get into what's called complex or complicated mourning, and this is where it goes on and on and on and on too long, and you'll find situations where people feel like they can't move on. This is why it's probably good to get ahead of it early. And you got to remember that physiologically, psychologically traumatic, and then with this, there's also, with what we're dealing with, you have loss, but you also have this thing called anticipatory grief. And it really has been identified in terminally ill cancer patients. Okay, so a really good friend of mine from the University of Pittsburgh writes about this. And he went through this with his wife. His wife died of cancer. And the process, there's a lot written about how do you deal with losing somebody, but there's not much written with how do you deal with knowing you're going to lose somebody. And the anticipation of that event can be very, very difficult. So you also have to understand, let's say you've lost somebody and it was a protracted illness in the past. And if you're going through this, you're going to start having those feelings too. Do you guys understand this? What's this all about? Identify if this is going on so that you can find somebody to talk to about it. How many people have seen the stages of grief? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Do you know she just straight made that up? It's not even true. Like it's okay, like some people do go through those stages, but you do not go through those stages in order. Does that make sense? It literally was made up. She made that up, wrote a book. I feel like I want to do that. But you can go through certain parts of that process. You can experience certain process. Unprocessed, inappropriately stored information gets stuck and will eat your lunch. Unprocessed means you haven't talked about it, you haven't acknowledged it, you haven't worked through it. If you've had the worst things happen to you, but you look them in the eye, you talk about it, and you move through it, you tend to be able to, you're not okay with it. It's never okay. But you're able to move forward in the process. But whenever you deny it, and it's okay, everything's fine, I'm good, that's when it can get really, really, because it's there anyway. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, it's there. And it's like underneath the surface, man, and like little things are going to trigger it. The way it is it literally moves along the neuro pathways, and you can think of it as getting literally put in a filing cabinet. The memory gets stored in an appropriate place. Whereas if you don't, it gets stuck, and it's just sitting there ready to trigger you. Many times beneath your consciousness. So, and that's all about this thing called the adaptive information processing model, which I will talk a little bit about next week. I can't, or 2 weeks. I can't really unpack that right this second because that's gonna go into a whole other area. So, but I do want to take a minute and kind of like talk a little bit about some of the heavy stuff that we're talking about. All right. So listen, this is heavy duty stuff. We're all in the middle of a battle. You guys are actually in a room right now, looking it in its face and hearing about it for what it's worth. Believe me, there should be a lot more people in this room. There are a lot of people in Greenville County who are in the same shoes that you all are in, except they're absolutely unwilling to even acknowledge that. What are they going to do? They're going to cross their fingers and let's just hope boys will be boys. And let's just hope this goes away. And let's hope he doesn't drink these holidays. And, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. You guys are here, but you got to take care of yourselves. You got to leave here tonight, and you got to make a commitment, whatever that is in your personal life, whatever that looks like, that you're going to find somebody to talk to, that you're going to get up tomorrow morning and you're going to pray, that you're going to spend some time reading tomorrow, that you're not going to allow this thing to just grab you and run you on automatic pilot. That you're actually going to take a step back and you're going to try to run it as much as you possibly can. And at the end of the day, so I don't know how you make sense of this. I can only tell you how I make sense of it. And I have to believe in a higher power. That's the only thing that I can do with this. And there's a saying that a good friend of mine, Parker from Spartanburg, says, and it is, everything will be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, it's not the end. And I take a lot of comfort in that. I take a lot of comfort in that process. But I would encourage you to really, really lean on that. If you have a faith or you have a belief, and if you don't, that's cool too. But if you do, I guess I'm just kind of taking a second to encourage you. This is a time, man, because there's so much about this that is 100% out of your control, and there's so much about this that is puzzling and completely mind-blowing that if you spend a lot of time trying to figure it out, and I'm going to use your analogy, Leslie, over and over again with the scenarios in the movies. If you spend too much time changing the characters in the movie and trying to look at this scene and that scene, you will not figure it out, and you will just go mad in the process. Okay? So good deal. Next Monday, we will be in a Kumbaya group, I promise you. All right? Carol will be here to help, right, Carol? Did I tell you about this?
No.
Okay. All right.
Anytime.
And it'll be if you haven't been to one of those groups, I would encourage you to come. It's kind of like an open share. And then in 2 weeks, we'll come back. What I will do is I will finish some stuff related to trauma, kind of related to fear. And then I'm going to roll into 2 other parts of the topic around boundaries. One is, how do you deal with a person who just is 100% overwhelming, intimidating, and will debate you to death. There's also that, they will just not let you off the hook. That's another. And then the last area is, how do you deal with that feeling where, and this isn't everybody, but sometimes people will say, it's hard for me to say no because I just want to be loved. I just want the person to like me. I don't want conflict, that kind of thing. And so we'll talk about those 2 topics as well. All right, guys. If we can get a second for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members running this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right. Thank you very much, guys. They're not the most comfortable chairs, not at all.